Welcome to Grandpa's Briefing Room. In this video, you'll hear some of the most fascinating real-life spy stories from the CIA archives, perfect for winding down before bed or keeping you company on a long drive. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It's always interesting to see where people are tuning in from around the world. Let's get started. Operation Ajax, the CIA coup in Iran. In 1953, the CIA orchestrated Operation Ajax, a secret mission that would not only overthrow Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, but also redefine how America projected its power around the world during the Cold War. Mossadegh had become a symbol of Iranian nationalism when he made the bold decision to nationalize Iran's oil industry, removing the control that the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company had held for decades. This move was popular among ordinary Iranians who believed their nation's resources should benefit its people, but it deeply angered Britain, which relied heavily on Iranian oil profits to rebuild its post-war economy. Unable to regain control through negotiations, Britain turned to the United States, framing Mossadegh's actions as a potential opening for Soviet influence in Iran. This narrative resonated with American leaders, who were determined to contain communism at any cost and who saw the Middle East as a critical battleground in this global struggle. Enter Kermit Roosevelt, Jr., a senior CIA officer and the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. He was tasked with executing Operation Ajax, working closely with British intelligence to remove Mossadegh from power and restore the authority of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had fled Iran under pressure but was seen as a more reliable pro-Western leader. The CIA devised a plan that combined propaganda, economic pressure, bribery, and orchestrated civil unrest. They paid journalists and local newspapers to publish stories painting Mossadegh as a communist sympathizer who sought to align Iran with the Soviet Union. At the same time, they funneled money to opposition groups, influential clerics, politicians, and military officers to build resistance against the Prime Minister. In the streets of Tehran, the CIA organized and funded demonstrations and riots, using paid agents and local gangs to create chaos and violence that would erode public confidence in Mossadegh's leadership. Cars were burned, shops were looted, and violent clashes erupted, all designed to make it appear as though Mossadegh had lost control of the country. Initially, the plan hit obstacles. The Shah was hesitant and fled to Rome after an early attempt to remove Mossadegh failed, and the Iranian people appeared ready to defend their prime minister. But Kermit Roosevelt persisted, intensifying the propaganda campaign and increasing payments to key military leaders to secure their support. On August 19, 1953, the situation reached its climax. Pro-Shah military units, backed by the CIA's logistical and financial support, moved decisively to arrest Mossadegh. Tanks rolled through Tehran as street battles broke out between Mossadegh's supporters and opposition forces. After hours of fighting, the coup succeeded, and Mossadegh was forced to surrender. He was later tried for treason and sentenced to house arrest, where he remained until his death in 1967. The Shah returned to Iran, now firmly supported by the United States and Britain, and began consolidating his power. His regime, increasingly authoritarian, relied on the brutal secret police, SAVAK, which received training and support from the CIA. While the Shah's rule brought a period of stability and economic development for some, it also led to widespread repression and a widening gap between the wealthy elite and the ordinary Iranian people. For the CIA, Operation Ajax was considered a major success, demonstrating the power of covert action in achieving American objectives without direct military intervention. It became a model for future CIA operations, shaping interventions in Guatemala, Chile, and other nations during the Cold War. However, the operation also sowed the seeds of long-term resentment among Iranians, who saw the coup as a clear example of foreign interference in their sovereignty. This resentment simmered for decades, eventually erupting into the 1979 Iranian Revolution, which overthrew the Shah and led to the establishment of the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini, transforming Iran into a fierce critic of the United States and fundamentally altering Middle Eastern geopolitics. In the history of espionage, Operation Ajax stands as a turning point, illustrating both the immediate effectiveness and the lasting consequences of using covert operations to achieve political objectives, leaving behind a legacy that would haunt U.S.-Iranian relations for generations. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story, Operation PBSUCCESS, the CIA coup in Guatemala. In the early 1950s, the United States turned its attention to Central America, where the small nation of Guatemala became the focus of one of the CIA's earliest and most controversial covert operations, Operation PBSUCCESS. At the heart of this mission was President Jacobo Arbenz, a democratically elected leader who had launched a series of reforms aimed at modernizing Guatemala. Among these was an ambitious land reform policy that sought to redistribute unused land from large landowners to landless peasants, hoping to break the cycle of poverty and dependence that had gripped the nation for generations. While popular among the poor, these reforms angered powerful interests, most notably the United Fruit Company, a massive American corporation that owned vast tracts of fertile land in Guatemala while paying minimal taxes. United Fruit lobbied the U.S. government, painting Arbenz as a communist sympathizer whose policies threatened American business interests and opened the door to Soviet influence in the Western Hemisphere. The United States, gripped by Cold War fears, was receptive to these claims. The Eisenhower administration, under the direction of Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles, both of whom had ties to United Fruit, approved a covert plan to remove Arbenz from power. The CIA's strategy for Operation PBSUCCESS was multi-layered, combining psychological warfare, economic pressure, and a small-scale paramilitary invasion designed to create the illusion of a massive uprising against Arbenz. Propaganda became a powerful weapon. The CIA launched Voice of Liberation, a radio station that broadcast anti-Arbenz messages across Guatemala, spreading fear, rumors, and false reports of rebel forces preparing to overthrow the government. Leaflets were dropped over cities, warning of the impending advance of freedom fighters, while local newspapers, influenced by the CIA, published stories designed to undermine public confidence in the president. The military component of the operation was led by Carlos Castillo Armas, a Guatemalan exile who had fled the country after participating in failed uprisings. Trained and supplied by the CIA, Castillo Armas led a small force of around 480 men who crossed the border from Honduras into Guatemala in June 1954. Although the force was too small to win a direct confrontation, the CIA's plan relied on creating psychological pressure, making it appear as though a major rebellion was underway. Simultaneously, the CIA worked to isolate Guatemala diplomatically, pressuring neighboring countries and using its influence within the Organization of American States to paint Arbenz as a threat to regional stability. The agency also applied economic pressure by blocking trade routes and restricting Guatemala's access to vital goods, weakening the government's position and increasing public frustration. As the broadcasts continued and rumors of rebel advances spread, panic began to take hold among the Guatemalan military and political elite. The illusion of a powerful invading force, combined with the fear of U.S. military intervention, eroded the morale of Arbenz's supporters and even created divisions within his own administration, as some officials began to waver in their support. On June 27, 1954, Jacobo Arbenz resigned from the presidency, hoping to prevent further bloodshed and chaos within the country. He sought asylum and eventually fled into exile, while Carlos Castillo Armas and his forces entered Guatemala City without facing significant resistance, welcomed by the opposition and conservative factions eager to restore the status quo. The coup was hailed as a success by the CIA, a textbook example of how covert action could shape the political landscape without the need for direct American military involvement. However, the consequences for Guatemala were severe and long-lasting. Following the coup, Castillo Armas assumed power and rolled back the reforms implemented by Arbenz. Over the following decades, Guatemala descended into a brutal civil war, marked by violence, repression, and the deaths of over 200,000 people, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire of a conflict rooted in inequality and fueled by Cold War politics. Operation PBSUCCESS also damaged America's reputation in Latin America, reinforcing perceptions of the United States as a nation willing to undermine democracy to protect its interests, even at the expense of the people it claimed to help. In the history of espionage, Operation PBSUCCESS stands as a stark example of the power and peril of covert operations, a mission that achieved its immediate objective while leaving a legacy of instability, violence, and distrust that would haunt Guatemala for generations. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story, Bay of Pigs Invasion. In the early hours of April 17, 1961, a group of Cuban exiles, trained and backed by the CIA, launched an invasion on the southern coast of Cuba, in what would become known as the Bay of Pigs Invasion. It was an operation that began with high hopes in Washington, but ended in a humiliating disaster, leaving a legacy of mistrust and tension that would shape U.S.-Cuban relations for decades. The story began in 1959, when Fidel Castro and his revolutionaries overthrew the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista, establishing a socialist government just 90 miles from the coast of the United States. The Eisenhower administration, deeply concerned about the spread of communism so close to American shores, authorized the CIA to begin planning a covert operation to remove Castro from power, fearing that Cuba could become a Soviet ally in the Americas. The plan, inherited by President John F. Kennedy upon taking office in 1961, involved training a force of around 1,400 Cuban exiles who would land in Cuba, ignite an uprising among the Cuban people, and overthrow Castro's government. The operation's architects believed that the invasion would spark a mass revolt, and that Castro's forces would quickly collapse under pressure, restoring a government more aligned with U.S. interests. The CIA's plan included airstrikes to destroy Castro's air force before the landing, and to provide cover for the invasion force. However, at the last moment, President Kennedy, concerned about overt U.S. involvement and fearing international condemnation, reduced the scale of air support, leaving the exiles without the promised cover from the skies. On April 17th, the exiles landed at Playa Girón in the Bay of Pigs, facing immediate and fierce resistance from Castro's well-prepared forces. The hoped-for uprisings within Cuba never materialized, as the local population did not rise against Castro as the CIA had anticipated, and the revolutionary government remained in firm control. Without sufficient air support, the invasion force found itself isolated, outnumbered, and outgunned. Cuban planes strafed the beaches, sank supply ships, and disrupted landing operations, while tanks and artillery pinned down the exiles. Over the next 3 days, intense fighting ensued as the invaders attempted to hold their ground, but their ammunition and supplies began to run out, and they were steadily pushed back toward the sea. By April 19th, the invasion had collapsed. More than 100 members of the invading force were killed, while over 1,100 were captured by Castro's forces and publicly displayed to the world, turning the invasion into a propaganda victory for the Cuban government. The United States eventually negotiated the release of the prisoners in exchange for a ransom of medical supplies and food valued at around $53 million, further highlighting the scale of the failure. The Bay of Pigs disaster had profound consequences for both the United States and Cuba. For Castro, it solidified his power and pushed Cuba closer to the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. For the United States, the failed invasion embarrassed the Kennedy administration, exposing flaws in intelligence, planning, and the limitations of covert interventions as a tool of foreign policy. Within the CIA, the invasion became a symbol of the risks associated with overconfidence and flawed assumptions, demonstrating how political constraints and unrealistic expectations can lead to mission failure, despite technological and financial advantages. It was a reminder that even the most carefully crafted plans can unravel when they fail to consider the will of the people and the complexity of the ground realities. In the history of espionage, the Bay of Pigs invasion remains a powerful lesson about the dangers of attempting regime change without understanding local dynamics, illustrating how a covert operation designed to be quick and decisive can evolve into a strategic failure with long-lasting geopolitical consequences. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story. Operation Chaos: How the CIA Spied on Americans at Home. During the turbulent years of the 1960s and 1970s, the CIA launched a controversial domestic espionage program known as Operation Chaos, a mission that would blur the line between foreign intelligence gathering and domestic spying, raising profound questions about privacy and government overreach in the United States. The origins of Operation Chaos lay in the growing fear of communist infiltration within the civil rights and anti-war movements during the Vietnam War era. As protests erupted across American cities and as movements like the Black Panthers and Students for a Democratic Society gained traction, the government grew suspicious that these movements might be influenced or even controlled by the Soviet Union or other foreign actors. In 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson authorized the CIA to begin investigating potential foreign ties to anti-war groups, leading to the creation of Operation Chaos under CIA officer Richard Ober. The operation began by collecting information on Americans traveling abroad and monitoring their connections with foreign nationals. Over time, the mission expanded far beyond its original mandate, evolving into a sweeping domestic surveillance operation targeting American citizens for their political beliefs and activism. The CIA's efforts included mail interception, wiretapping, and the recruitment of informants within activist communities. Agents infiltrated protests and political meetings, gathering details about the personal lives, financial activities, and contacts of those involved in the anti-war movement and civil rights protests. The agency hoped to find evidence of Soviet or Chinese involvement, but despite years of surveillance, no significant foreign control was ever proven. As the operation continued, the CIA collected files on over 7,000 American citizens and more than 1,000 domestic organizations, compiling vast amounts of information that included reports on demonstrations, speeches, and internal activities of activist groups. The agency even monitored journalists who covered anti-war protests, fearing they might be spreading foreign propaganda. Operation Chaos remained a closely guarded secret within the intelligence community until the Watergate scandal and increasing public scrutiny of government activities led to deeper investigations. In December 1974, journalist Seymour Hersh revealed the existence of Operation Chaos in the New York Times, exposing the CIA's illegal surveillance of Americans and sparking outrage among the public. This revelation led to the formation of the Church Committee in 1975, led by Senator Frank Church, to investigate abuses by intelligence agencies. The committee's findings shocked the nation, revealing how the government had violated constitutional rights under the guise of national security, undermining trust in American institutions. In response to these findings, Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, in 1978, establishing a legal framework for intelligence agencies to conduct surveillance while protecting civil liberties and introducing a system of checks and balances designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. Operation Chaos serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and secrecy within government institutions. It shows how fear and paranoia, even when driven by concerns about national security, can lead to the erosion of freedoms and the targeting of citizens who exercise their rights to dissent and protest. In the broader history of espionage, Operation Chaos stands as a stark reminder that the pursuit of security must be carefully balanced against the protection of liberty, and that vigilance is necessary to ensure that the institutions designed to protect democracy do not become tools for undermining it from within. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story, Operation Cyclone, CIA's secret war in Afghanistan. In the shadowy landscape of the Cold War, Few operations illustrate the intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union like Operation Cyclone, the CIA's covert effort to arm and fund the Afghan Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan War. From 1979 to 1989, it became one of the longest and most expensive covert operations in CIA history, shaping Afghanistan and the modern Middle East. The seeds of Operation Cyclone were planted in 1978, when a communist coup installed the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, aligning Afghanistan with the Soviet Union. The new government introduced radical reforms, including land redistribution and women's rights, but harsh crackdowns and disregard for tribal structures led to widespread unrest across the deeply traditional society. In December 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to stabilize the communist government, expecting a quick intervention. Instead, they found themselves locked in a brutal conflict against a determined Afghan resistance. The United States saw the Soviet invasion as an opportunity to weaken its rival through a prolonged guerrilla conflict, much like the U.S. experience in Vietnam. Under President Carter and later President Reagan, the CIA was tasked with supporting the Afghan Mujahideen in their fight against Soviet forces and the communist regime in Kabul. Operation Cyclone funneled billions of dollars in weapons, supplies, and training to Afghan fighters. Working closely with Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, the CIA used Pakistan as a channel to deliver weapons and support, including rifles, ammunition, and eventually Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, which changed the course of the war by allowing Mujahideen fighters to shoot down Soviet helicopters. Beyond supplying weapons, the CIA and ISI established training programs in Pakistan, instructing thousands of Afghan fighters in guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and the use of advanced weaponry. This network built a powerful resistance movement capable of inflicting heavy casualties on Soviet forces and disrupting their control over Afghanistan's mountainous terrain. Operation Cyclone also drew international support, with Saudi Arabia matching U.S. funding and China providing additional weapons. Afghanistan became a central battlefield of the Cold War, where global superpowers fought indirectly, using Afghan fighters as proxies in a devastating conflict. However, the operation had consequences. The CIA's support often went to the most radical factions within the Mujahideen, including leaders like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, known for extremist views and brutal tactics. The influx of weapons and the creation of a militant infrastructure contributed to the instability that would plague Afghanistan for decades. In 1989, facing heavy casualties and mounting costs, the Soviet Union withdrew its forces, marking a symbolic victory for the Mujahideen and a triumph for U.S. Cold War strategy. This withdrawal weakened the Soviet Union and is often cited as one of the factors leading to its collapse. Yet Afghanistan did not find peace. Civil war erupted among the Mujahideen factions, leading to chaos and the rise of the Taliban in the 1990s. Some fighters and networks supported during Operation Cyclone would later become part of extremist groups, including Al-Qaeda, which would eventually target the United States. Operation Cyclone remains a complex chapter in espionage history. It showcased the power of covert operations in achieving geopolitical goals while demonstrating the unforeseen consequences of such strategies. The mission succeeded in weakening a superpower rival, but also sowed seeds of instability that would affect global security for years to come. In the Cold War narrative, Operation Cyclone serves as a reminder of how interventions, even with clear objectives, can lead to long-lasting and unpredictable outcomes, reshaping the geopolitical landscape in ways that extend far beyond the battlefield. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story: CIA spy planes, U-2 and A-12. The Eyes in the Sky. During the Cold War, the need for intelligence about the Soviet Union led the United States to develop some of the most advanced aircraft ever built. The U-2 and A-12 spy planes became critical tools for the CIA, providing the United States with detailed information about its adversaries from the skies, shaping policy decisions and avoiding potential conflicts in an era of high tension. The U-2 program was conceived in the early 1950s when the United States realized it had limited knowledge of Soviet capabilities, particularly regarding missile and bomber production. Designed by Lockheed's Skunk Works under the leadership of Clarence Kelly Johnson, the U-2 was a high-altitude reconnaissance plane capable of flying at over 70,000 feet, above the reach of Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft missiles, or so it was believed at the time. In 1956, the CIA began U-2 overflights of the Soviet Union, gathering photographic intelligence on military installations, airfields, and missile sites. These missions provided the U.S. with critical insights, such as evidence that the feared bomber gap and missile gap between the Soviet Union and the United States were exaggerated, easing fears that the U.S. was falling dangerously behind in the arms race. The U-2 missions were risky, with pilots flying alone over hostile territory, knowing that if they were shot down, it could trigger a diplomatic crisis or even escalate into conflict. This risk became a reality on May 1, 1960, when CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers was shot down by a Soviet surface-to-air missile while flying a U-2 over the Soviet Union. Powers survived and was captured, and the incident led to a major diplomatic crisis, with the Soviet Union publicly displaying the wreckage and Powers himself, humiliating the United States. The U-2 incident led to the cancellation of direct overflights of the Soviet Union, but the need for intelligence remained. This led to the development of a faster, higher-flying replacement, the A-12 Oxcart. Also developed by Lockheed's Skunk Works, the A-12 could fly at speeds exceeding Mach 3 and altitudes over 80,000 feet, making it the fastest air-breathing manned aircraft ever built. First flown in 1962, the A-12 was designed to evade enemy defenses through speed and altitude. Its missions provided the CIA with critical intelligence during the 1960s, particularly over North Vietnam, North Korea, and other areas where satellite coverage was limited or unavailable. The A-12's capabilities allowed it to conduct reconnaissance missions that would have been impossible for slower, lower-flying aircraft. The A-12 was eventually phased out in favor of the Air Force's SR-71 Blackbird, which was based on the A-12 design but included additional capabilities and 2 seats for a pilot and reconnaissance systems officer. However, the A-12's contributions to intelligence gathering were significant, providing high-resolution imagery and data that shaped American understanding of adversary capabilities and movements during critical moments of the Cold War. The U-2 program, meanwhile, continued with upgraded versions, and remarkably, the U-2 remains in service today, more than 6 decades after its introduction, providing high-altitude reconnaissance for the United States. Modern U-2s are equipped with advanced sensors and communication systems, continuing the aircraft's legacy as a vital tool for intelligence gathering. Both the U-2 and A-12 programs demonstrated the lengths to which the United States was willing to go to secure critical intelligence during the Cold War, reflecting the constant tension and the high stakes of the era. These spy planes not only provided crucial information that helped prevent potential conflicts, but also served as symbols of technological innovation and the relentless pursuit of strategic advantage. Their missions were not without cost. Pilots faced the constant risk of death or capture, and each mission carried the possibility of escalating Cold War tensions. Yet, the intelligence they gathered helped leaders make informed decisions, reducing the uncertainty that could lead to miscalculations in a world divided by ideology and nuclear weapons. The stories of the U-2 and A-12 are a testament to the courage of the pilots who flew them and the engineers who built them, illustrating how technology, espionage, and geopolitics intersected in the skies during one of the most dangerous periods in modern history. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story. Phoenix Program: The CIA's Shadow War in Vietnam. The Phoenix Program was one of the most controversial covert operations of the Vietnam War, designed by the CIA and South Vietnamese intelligence to dismantle the Viet Cong's underground political and support networks. Its mission was to identify, capture, or eliminate members of the Viet Cong infrastructure, a shadow government operating in villages and provinces across South Vietnam. Launched in 1967, the program was seen by its architects as a necessary effort to weaken the Viet Cong's hold over the rural population, which was essential for their ability to wage guerrilla warfare against U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. The Viet Cong relied on local cadres to collect taxes, recruit fighters, gather intelligence, and maintain control over communities, often through fear and intimidation. The Phoenix program sought to disrupt this system by creating a centralized intelligence database and coordinating efforts among the CIA, U.S. military, and South Vietnamese security forces. Intelligence officers worked with local informants, defectors, and captured enemy soldiers to compile lists of suspected Viet Cong operatives. These lists were then used to plan raids, arrests, and, in many cases, targeted killings. The program utilized provincial reconnaissance units, which were small, specialized teams trained and funded by the CIA to carry out operations against suspected Viet Cong members. These units conducted ambushes, kidnappings, interrogations, and assassinations, operating in the shadows and often without direct oversight. While the stated goal of the Phoenix program was to weaken the Viet Cong's infrastructure through targeted, intelligence-driven operations, in practice, the program became notorious for its brutality and lack of accountability. Reports emerged of torture during interrogations, executions without trial, and the targeting of individuals based on false or flimsy intelligence, including personal vendettas and corruption among local officials. Between 1968 and 1972, the Phoenix program claimed to have neutralized over 80,000 suspected Viet Cong operatives, with more than 20,000 reported killed. Supporters argued that the program disrupted the Viet Cong's ability to operate and gather resources, contributing to the weakening of their influence in many areas of South Vietnam. However, the human cost and the program's methods drew heavy criticism. News of abuses and civilian deaths fueled anti-war sentiment in the United States and raised ethical questions about the conduct of the war. Congressional hearings in the early 1970s exposed the darker aspects of the program, revealing stories of torture, extrajudicial killings, and the lack of clear oversight. The Phoenix program also had significant psychological impacts on both the Viet Cong and the civilian population. Fear of infiltration and betrayal eroded trust within Viet Cong networks, forcing them to divert resources to security and counterintelligence efforts. For civilians, the constant threat of raids, arrests, and violence created an environment of fear and uncertainty, further complicating the already complex relationship between villagers and both sides of the conflict. As the war continued, the Phoenix program's effectiveness became a subject of debate. While it succeeded in disrupting Viet Cong operations in some areas, it also fueled resentment among the population and provided propaganda for the North Vietnamese and anti-war movements abroad. The use of harsh tactics and the targeting of suspected operatives without due process raised questions about the moral costs of the program. By 1972, as the United States began to scale back its involvement in Vietnam, the Phoenix program was gradually phased out. The legacy of the program remains controversial, reflecting the challenges and moral compromises faced during counterinsurgency efforts in a deeply complex and brutal conflict. In the history of espionage and covert operations, the Phoenix program serves as a stark reminder of the fine line between effective counterinsurgency and the erosion of ethical standards in warfare. It illustrates how intelligence-driven operations, when lacking oversight and clear legal frameworks, can lead to abuses that undermine the very objectives they are meant to achieve. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story, Operation Mongoose, America's secret war against Castro. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, the United States was determined to find another way to remove Fidel Castro from power in Cuba. This determination led to the creation of Operation Mongoose, a covert program led by the CIA with the goal of destabilizing Castro's government through sabotage, subversion, and even assassination attempts, all while maintaining plausible deniability during the Cold War. Authorized by President John F. Kennedy in November 1961, Operation Mongoose was overseen by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, and run by Air Force General Edward Lansdale, working closely with the CIA's Task Force W. The operation's mission was clear: to do whatever was necessary to disrupt and ultimately overthrow Castro's communist regime, which had aligned itself with the Soviet Union just 90 miles from American shores. Operation Mongoose included a wide range of activities aimed at weakening Castro's hold on Cuba. Sabotage missions targeted factories, power plants, and transportation infrastructure to create economic disruption. Plans were made to encourage defections within the Cuban government and military, spread anti-Castro propaganda, and support dissident groups within the country. The program also included some of the most bizarre assassination plots in the history of espionage. The CIA explored using poisoned cigars, exploding seashells, and even chemically treated diving suits to assassinate Castro. Other plans included contaminating his personal items to cause illness or to make his beard fall out, hoping to damage his public image and mystique among supporters. While many of these plots seemed almost comical, the seriousness with which the United States pursued Castro's removal reflected the tension of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, was deeply connected to the tensions between the United States and Cuba that Operation Mongoose was meant to address. Despite the vast resources poured into Operation Mongoose, the program failed to achieve its primary objective. Castro remained in power, and the efforts to undermine his regime often had the opposite effect, allowing him to portray himself as a resilient leader resisting American imperialism. The failed plots and acts of sabotage only strengthened his domestic position and his alignment with the Soviet Union. The operation also risked escalating tensions with the Soviet Union at a time when the threat of nuclear conflict was real. The aggressive nature of the program, combined with the secrecy surrounding it, highlighted the lengths to which the United States was willing to go to combat communism in the Western Hemisphere, regardless of the potential consequences. Operation Mongoose continued until 1963, gradually losing momentum after President Kennedy's assassination. The program was eventually scaled back and replaced by other forms of covert surveillance and limited operations against Cuba, but it remained one of the most significant examples of the CIA's willingness to engage in clandestine activities to achieve geopolitical goals. The legacy of Operation Mongoose is a complex one. On one hand, it demonstrated the creativity and determination of the United States to counter perceived threats during the Cold War. On the other hand, it exposed the ethical and practical limitations of using covert operations to influence the internal affairs of other nations. The operation's failure to remove Castro underscored the challenges of regime change through covert means, particularly when the target of such efforts is deeply entrenched and able to rally public support against foreign interference. It also contributed to a broader pattern of U.S. involvement in Latin America during the Cold War, where covert operations often produced unintended consequences and long-term instability. In the broader history of espionage, Operation Mongoose serves as a reminder of how fear and ideology can drive nations to take extreme measures, and how those measures can shape international relations for decades. It is a story of ambition, secrecy, and the limits of covert power in a world where the lines between security and aggression are often blurred. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story: the Glomar Explorer Project, the CIA's secret submarine recovery. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean during the Cold War lay the shattered remains of a Soviet submarine, K-129, which sank in 1968 under mysterious circumstances. For the CIA, the wreck was a potential treasure trove of intelligence, holding Soviet nuclear missiles, cryptographic materials, and insight into Soviet naval technology. To recover it, the CIA launched one of its most audacious and secretive operations, the Glomar Explorer Project. The operation, officially known as Project Azorian, was conceived in an era when intelligence on Soviet nuclear capabilities was critical for maintaining the balance of power. The sunken submarine rested at a depth of over 16,000 feet, far beyond the reach of conventional salvage operations. However, the potential value of the intelligence it contained was so high that the CIA deemed it worth the risk and cost. To undertake this unprecedented mission, the CIA needed a cover story that would allow them to operate in the Pacific without arousing suspicion from the Soviets or the public. They turned to billionaire Howard Hughes, using his reputation for eccentric and ambitious projects as a front. Under the guise of mining manganese nodules from the ocean floor, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a massive ship equipped with advanced technology, was constructed specifically for the mission. The ship, launched in 1973, was designed with a large central well and a sophisticated capture system capable of lowering a claw-like device to the ocean floor to grasp the submarine and lift it to the surface. The engineering challenges were immense, requiring innovations in deep-sea recovery that had never been attempted before. In the summer of 1974, the Glomar Explorer reached the site and began its descent to the ocean floor. For weeks, the crew worked under intense secrecy, carefully maneuvering the capture device around the submarine and attempting to lift it from the seabed. The operation was partially successful. A section of the submarine, along with the remains of 6 Soviet sailors, was brought to the surface. The exact details of what was recovered remain classified, but it is believed that the CIA obtained valuable cryptographic materials and insights into Soviet missile technology. However, during the recovery, a significant portion of the submarine broke apart and fell back to the ocean floor, slipping through the grasp of the recovery device. Despite this setback, the mission demonstrated the technical capabilities and audacity of the CIA during the Cold War. The secrecy surrounding the operation was compromised in 1975 when journalists learned of the mission, leading to public exposure. When asked about the operation, the CIA responded with the now famous phrase, "We can neither confirm nor deny," establishing what became known as the Glomar response, a standard phrase used by government agencies to avoid revealing sensitive information. The Glomar Explorer project highlighted the lengths to which the CIA was willing to go to gather intelligence during the Cold War, pushing the boundaries of engineering and secrecy in pursuit of information that could tip the scales in a global standoff. It also demonstrated the risks and challenges inherent in such ambitious covert operations, where even partial success could yield valuable results, while underscoring the limits of secrecy in a democratic society. The operation's exposure fueled public debate about government secrecy and accountability, raising questions about the ethical and legal boundaries of covert intelligence gathering. It became a symbol of Cold War intrigue, showcasing the intersection of technology, espionage, and the geopolitical tensions of the era. Today, the story of the Glomar Explorer project remains a remarkable chapter in the history of espionage, reflecting the determination and ingenuity of intelligence agencies in their pursuit of critical information, even from the ocean's depths. It serves as a reminder of the extraordinary measures nations will take in the name of security and the thin line between ambition and overreach in the shadow world of espionage. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story. Aldrich Ames, the CIA's traitor. Within among the most damaging spies in American history, Aldrich Ames was a CIA officer who became a double agent for the Soviet Union, betraying his country for money while causing the deaths of numerous informants and agents who trusted the CIA to protect them. His story is a chilling reminder of how espionage can strike from within, inflicting severe damage without a single shot being fired. Ames joined the CIA in 1962, following in the footsteps of his father, who was also a CIA officer. Known for his intelligence but also for personal flaws, including alcoholism and financial irresponsibility, Ames struggled with debt throughout his career, even as he rose within the ranks of the agency. By the mid-1980s, he found himself in serious financial trouble, exacerbated by a lavish lifestyle and a new marriage that required resources he could not legally obtain on a government salary. In 1985, seeking a way out of his financial problems, Ames approached Soviet officials and offered his services as a spy, providing them with highly classified information in exchange for payment. The Soviets, recognizing the value of his access, paid him handsomely, eventually giving him over $2 million, making him one of the highest-paid spies in history. Ames had access to the identities of CIA assets within the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, as well as details of ongoing operations and surveillance activities. His betrayal led to the exposure and execution of at least 10 CIA sources and compromised many more, effectively crippling the agency's intelligence network in the Soviet Union during a critical period of the Cold War. For nearly 9 years, Ames continued his espionage while maintaining his position within the CIA's counterintelligence division. His lifestyle, including the purchase of a large home in Virginia with cash and expensive cars, raised some suspicions, but internal investigations failed to identify him as the mole, in part due to his position within counterintelligence, which allowed him to misdirect inquiries and protect himself. The damage caused by Ames was extensive. Not only did it result in the deaths of individuals who had risked their lives to provide intelligence to the United States, but it also provided the Soviets with insight into the CIA's methods and priorities, allowing them to feed misinformation back to the agency and manipulate U.S. perceptions of Soviet activities. In 1994, after years of suspicion and investigation, the CIA and FBI gathered enough evidence to arrest Ames. On February 21, 1994, he was taken into custody outside his home, and his wife was arrested the same day for her role in helping him conceal his activities. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Ames pleaded guilty to espionage charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Ames case led to a period of intense scrutiny within the CIA and the broader U.S. intelligence community. It exposed serious weaknesses in internal security procedures and highlighted the challenges of identifying insider threats, especially when the individual betraying secrets holds a position of trust and authority. In the aftermath, the CIA implemented new measures to improve its internal security, including financial monitoring of employees, enhanced counterintelligence practices, and stricter oversight of personnel with access to sensitive information. The agency also worked to rebuild its networks in countries where Ames had caused the most damage, a process that took years and required rebuilding trust with potential sources. The betrayal by Aldrich Ames serves as a stark reminder that espionage is not only a matter of foreign agents and covert operations overseas, but also a risk that can emerge from within. The human motivations of greed, disillusionment, and personal weakness can undermine even the most powerful intelligence organizations, causing damage that may take decades to repair. In the history of espionage, the story of Aldrich Ames illustrates the high stakes of the intelligence world and the devastating impact a single insider can have when driven by personal gain over loyalty to their nation. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story. Iran-Contra Affair. The secret dealings of the CIA. The Iran-Contra affair stands as one of the most controversial episodes in American intelligence and political history, revealing how covert operations, secret deals, and political agendas can intersect in ways that challenge the foundations of democratic oversight. It was a complex web of arms sales, secret funding, and covert wars, unfolding during the 1980s under the Reagan administration and shaking public trust in government transparency. The affair had its roots in two separate but connected issues. First was the desire of the Reagan administration to support the Contras, a rebel group fighting the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua, which the U.S. viewed as a communist foothold in Central America. Second was the goal of securing the release of American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon, a group with ties to Iran. Congress, reflecting concerns over human rights abuses and the potential for another Vietnam-like entanglement, passed the Boland Amendment, restricting U.S. government support for the Contras. However, key figures within the Reagan administration were determined to continue aiding the rebels, viewing the fight as part of the larger Cold War struggle against communism. In a separate development, senior U.S. officials saw an opportunity to engage with moderate elements in Iran, which was then engaged in a brutal war with Iraq, to secure the release of American hostages in Lebanon. This led to the controversial decision to sell arms to Iran, despite an existing arms embargo, in the hope that Iran would use its influence to free the hostages. The funds from these secret arms sales to Iran were then covertly diverted to support the Contras in Nicaragua, effectively bypassing the congressional restrictions. This operation was managed by a small group within the National Security Council, including Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who played a key role in coordinating the logistics of the arms transfers and the distribution of funds to the Contras. The operation remained hidden from public view until 1986, when a Lebanese newspaper revealed the arms sales to Iran, leading to further investigations by the American press. As the story unraveled, it became clear that the administration had been involved in a secret operation that violated both U.S. law and official policy. The revelations sparked a political firestorm, leading to congressional hearings and extensive media coverage. The investigations revealed a shadow foreign policy conducted by a small group within the government, operating without accountability and in direct violation of congressional mandates. Key figures, including Oliver North, National Security Advisor John Poindexter, and others, were implicated in the scandal. North testified publicly, becoming a polarizing figure as he defended the actions as necessary to combat communism while admitting to shredding documents and misleading Congress to protect the operation. The legal consequences for those involved were mixed. Several officials were convicted of charges related to the affair, including obstruction of justice and lying to Congress. However, many convictions were later overturned on appeal, and in 1992, outgoing President George H.W. Bush issued pardons to several individuals involved, effectively ending the legal pursuit of accountability for the affair. The Iran-Contra affair raised profound questions about the limits of executive power, the role of Congress in overseeing foreign policy, and the ethical boundaries of covert operations. It exposed the ease with which secrecy can be used to bypass democratic processes and the challenges of maintaining accountability within intelligence and national security activities. For the CIA, the affair highlighted the dangers of entanglement in politically driven operations without clear oversight, and it damaged the agency's credibility both domestically and internationally. It also served as a case study in the unintended consequences of covert action, where efforts to achieve strategic objectives can undermine the very principles they aim to defend. In the broader history of espionage and covert operations, the Iran-Contra affair remains a stark example of how the pursuit of geopolitical goals can lead to decisions that conflict with the values of transparency and accountability, illustrating the complex interplay between politics, secrecy, and power. With this chapter concluded, we turn to our next story. Extraordinary Rendition: The CIA's Secret Transfers. In the years following the September 11, 2001 attacks, the CIA expanded its global counterterrorism efforts through a covert system known as Extraordinary Rendition, a program that involved secretly capturing suspected terrorists and transferring them to third countries for interrogation and detention. This program, operating in the shadows of the War on Terror, sparked global debates about human rights, legality, and the limits of power in the pursuit of security. The rationale behind Extraordinary Rendition was to remove high-value targets from the battlefield while extracting intelligence to prevent future attacks. Suspects captured in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other regions were covertly flown to countries where the CIA believed interrogation could proceed more effectively, often outside the constraints of American legal protections. Many of the detainees were transferred to countries known for harsh interrogation methods, including Egypt, Jordan, and Morocco, in what critics described as outsourcing torture while allowing the United States to maintain plausible deniability. The CIA argued that these methods were necessary to extract vital information from individuals involved in planning or executing terrorist attacks against American interests. Secret CIA-operated flights, often using front companies, transported suspects under tight security. The program was expansive, with reports indicating that hundreds of individuals were subjected to rendition, some of whom were later found to have no links to terrorism, highlighting the flaws in intelligence gathering and the risks of operating in secrecy. Black sites, secret prisons operated by the CIA in various countries, became a crucial part of the rendition program. In these facilities, detainees were subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and stress positions, methods that many human rights organizations and legal experts have classified as torture. Supporters of the program argued that these methods produced critical intelligence, disrupting terrorist networks and preventing attacks. However, investigations and declassified reports later revealed that much of the intelligence obtained under torture was unreliable, as detainees provided false information under extreme duress to end their suffering. The existence of the extraordinary rendition program remained a closely guarded secret until investigative journalists and human rights organizations began uncovering the network of flights and secret prisons. Revelations about the program, including detailed reports by the Washington Post and investigations by the Council of Europe, led to international outcry and legal challenges in multiple countries. The program also created diplomatic tensions between the United States and its allies, as many European countries were found to have allowed CIA rendition flights to use their airspace or to host black sites, raising questions about their complicity in human rights abuses. Domestically, the exposure of the program fueled debates about the balance between security and civil liberties. Critics argued that extraordinary rendition violated both U.S. and international law, undermining America's moral authority and setting dangerous precedents for the treatment of detainees. In 2006, President George W. Bush acknowledged the existence of secret CIA prisons, announcing that some detainees would be transferred to Guantanamo Bay and that the CIA's detention and interrogation program would continue under revised guidelines. The debate over the legality and morality of extraordinary rendition continued into subsequent administrations, with President Barack Obama issuing an executive order in 2009 banning torture while leaving room for renditions under certain conditions. For the CIA, the extraordinary rendition program represented a tool of counterterrorism during a period of fear and urgency. However, it also became a symbol of the ethical compromises and legal gray areas that can arise when national security objectives are pursued without transparency and accountability. In the broader history of espionage and covert operations, the extraordinary rendition program stands as a reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and the importance of maintaining human rights and legal standards, even in the pursuit of security in a dangerous world. This brings us to the end of today's stories. For those using this video to fall asleep or to relax during a long drive, a calming tape recorder sound has been added for the next half hour. This steady, low-frequency sound helps quiet the mind, ease tension, and support deep relaxation as you drift off to sleep or continue your journey. Thank you for spending this time with Grandpa's Briefing Room.